You know, we've had a run of programs here on Small Business Digest about working together, whether husband or wife, um, brothers and sisters. But today we have father and son talking about working together and being successful together. So we welcome Sam and Dan Barron to the program. Welcome.
Good to be here, Don.
Yeah, thanks, Don.
Okay. As we ask all our guests, and we'll start with Dan, tell us about your little personal background, which I found fascinating when I heard about it. Tell us about your personal background before we go to your son.
So, how many hours do we have to go over this, Don?
We
I
have
was
all the time in the world.
I was born in New York, actually in Brooklyn, and grew up, as I like to say, as an ocean rat. By the town I grew up in was next to Jones Beach, and I thought I'd achieved my lifetime goal. I became a Jones Beach lifeguard at the age of 18. And the Long Island State Park Commission, in its infinite wisdom, wouldn't let me work my second year because I tested positive for mononucleosis. So a friend and I drove out to San Francisco. It was 1968, and we saw no reason to leave. So that got me to the West Coast, and then in 1970, moved up to Calistoga, and the work I found was in vineyards. So I actually started my career over 50 years ago as a field worker, which is really a powerful thing in terms of my understanding and ability to relate to people at all levels in this endeavor. I refuse to call it an industry, in this endeavor of making fine wine. And after a few years of doing that, I decided to go back to college. I got a BA and a BS and a master's from UC Davis, and then eventually ended up in France, worked and stumbled into the door at Chateau Petrus, and the owner offered me a 1-year internship, which then turned into Dominus, sent me back, and I was the first employee at Dominus in Yountville, California. And from there, I went to Silver Oak, where I was technical director for 23 vintages. And when I retired from Silver Oak after the 2016 vintage, I turned to Sam and said, well, that's it. I'm not going to make wine anymore. I can't even imagine a life not making wine. So he and I decided to start a brand, start our own label, and call the wines Complan. And that's how we started the partnership.
Okay. Now, Sam, tell us your side of the story.
Well, I'm lucky that I got to grow up in the Napa Valley. There are we are few and far between people who don't migrate to Napa. So, I grew up in the vines. I was walking vineyards with my dad essentially my whole life. And dad was always making wine, and it was always just such an interesting craft. And I loved that he was so connected to nature and that cycle of nature. And you kind of, when you produce wine, right, you spend a lot of time in those cycles. You have a built-in annual cycle of creation, and thought that was really powerful and special. And so, of course, no matter how cool you think it is that your dad's a winemaker, you have to say you don't want to be one. And so I went off to college and studied geology, and then kind of got the bug and I had been farming growing up, but I just did it as a summer job because I was here, and that was what was around. So I was working for some vineyard management companies and collecting samples, and those days are special. You're out there alone, you know, you're the lowest person on the totem pole, so there's not as much requirement in terms of, you know, email and calls. You're just collecting data and spending a lot of time with vineyards. And you know, you report.
Talk about the 3:30 a.m.
Yeah, so yeah,
I think that
I was
was
doing
very special.
pre-dawn leaf water potentials. So I would wake up at 12:30 p.m. a.m., 12:30 a.m., and then go out and walk vineyards at night alone for all summer. You know, it was a crazy, crazy schedule, but a lot of kind of special evenings in the vineyards listening to scary books alone. Con- Convinced I was
And
going to
you,
get attacked by mountain lions.
Why do you go to a vineyard at 3:30 in the morning?
The theory behind it is that it's without the sun and the sun kind of forcing transpiration, there won't be as much fluctuation in the leaf water potential, in the potential of the vine to kind of like pull through the water. So it's at the greatest equilibrium with the soil. So they're just cleaner numbers. There's not as much variance in the data, and that variance can really be defined by temperature. You notice when you're doing these water assessments, the hotter it is that day, the more the vine's transpiring. So it's just trying to kind of like clean up the noise that you get from variation in temperature during the day. Um,
one of the
and
things we're trying to do in what I've termed conscientious agriculture is to use as little water as we need. It not only is better for the environment, but it actually makes better wine. And so one of the ways that we assess it is the amount of suction that the leaves are pulling on the roots. And when the farm advisors developed this, they said, well, let's have the farmer do it at solar noon because everyone knows when noon is. But it's actually not when the researchers do it. The researchers do it in the dark when, as Sam says, the vines are at equilibrium. Then you get a real reading that doesn't differ if it's a foggy day or a sunny day.
Hmm.
But there's nothing more special than being out in an area like the Napa Valley, which can be so crowded at times, especially in the summer with people coming to visit the wineries. And to be out there alone at 4 a.m, it's just magical. It's really fun.
yeah, yeah, I mean, you get to watch those sunrises alone in the vineyard every day. It's pretty special. So I was convinced I was going to kind of be a viticulturalist. Essentially, I love farming and love being out in vineyards, and then I went back to Davis to study B&E, in the footsteps of my dad, and you know, just got really obsessed with the craft, got really obsessed with fermentations of all sorts, and kind of just loving that transition from grape juice to wine, and really obsessed about the craft, and producers. And I think winemaking, it's like any art form, right? You really need to learn the history in order to iterate in the future. And so tasting with tons of different producers when I was in Europe. And then of course we were both right in a sense. When I came back from Europe, I told my dad, you know, I have a degree, and told my dad I'm going to move to San Francisco to work at wine shops as my last internship. I'm going to go make $10.50 an hour. And he's like, you should probably just spend that time getting a business degree, right? Go get an MBA. And in a sense, it was an MBA of sorts. You know, I learned a ton about production, a ton about sales, and the way that people present wines in shops. And then subsequently have actually gone back to Sonoma State to get a certificate in wine business. So, you know, we were both right in a sense. I think working at those wine shops and seeing how people kind of curate what I consider to be these small independent museums of wine, tasting with all these producers, was really powerful, and really kind of, it's important to know where you land in the world of wine, and how to kind of the right way to present so that consumers can wrap their heads around it. And you know, it's lovely to get to taste all these special wines, and nobody gets to taste as much wine as somebody at a wine shop. And the variation in the amount of wines I got to taste, because I was working at 2 wine shops and a wine bar. I mean, I just got to taste so many wines and host all these different tastings with different producers and pick their brains and ask them pretty technical questions. They were always kind of like, you're obviously not a sommelier. You're much more interested in this, in some of the production stuff. And somms are super knowledgeable too. And this is not a dig at sommeliers. They're essentially our marketing force. So we love sommeliers. You guys are the best. um, but
Well,
I'm
let's,
asking
yeah,
very
let's,
technical.
I'm going to
Sorry, go.
stop you right here because what's your website and spell it out?
Yeah, so our wines are Complant Wine. It's www.complant, PLANT, wine.com. COMPLANT wine.com. We are a tiny producer, and any support helps. If any of you are enthusiastic about the wines or our story and want to support us directly, it's the only way we could get to continue making our craft.
Well, now let's ask a question. Since this is Small Business Digest, how do you divide the company? What do you do, and what does your father do?
So, I think my dad has great expertise in Cabernet, and I love Chardonnay. And so the way we think that art made by committee tends to be kind of dumbed down in my experience, and you experience that at larger and larger companies when you make wines and 7 different people are in on the blending trials. You end up making a wine that is acceptable and will probably could please a broader swath of people, but isn't as much of a statement. And so our rule of thumb is that each of us owns a wine. But of course, like, we're always tasting together, talking about the wines. So generally, my dad's the driving force behind the Cabernet. My dad's one of the great Cabernet, minds in the New World, and really understands Napa in a way that very few people do. And I get the Chardonnay because, I love Chardonnay and I've spent a lot of time focusing on it. But of course, like, these are open conversations, and it's really special to have a producing partner whose taste you actually respect. And so we are, we're experts in the craft. And so it's really fun to kind of bounce ideas off of each other. And then, in terms of sales, in terms of the business side, I think there's something really, really interesting. And because of what my dad kind of pushed me towards and having that history in wine, he's done it all already. So to have a mentor who can say, look, you really should go study business. Like, so I've done that, right? And so I've worked a lot in wholesale. But we divide the tasks equally. For brand management, I think, you essentially have accounting, brand management, and wine production, right? If you think about it. And so, brand management and our brand identity is something that's, we've learned a lot about. And the reality is it takes a good branding team to make good art. If you
Or to sell good art.
or
anyway.
sell good art, right? If you can't get the word out, it doesn't matter how good the art is if nobody knows about it, right? I would say,
If a great bottle is opened in the forest and no one drinks it.
Exactly. And so we work together with a great marketing team, Balzac Communications. They've helped us a lot with kind of like ironing out our brand identity, ironing out something that is very digestible. I mean, you've been with us for 15 minutes, and my dad and I could talk for 20 minutes about a sunrise, so it's like you need somebody to kind of like to make that a little more discreet so people can digest it quickly.
And I think you're not taking enough credit, Sam. Sam's skill is his day job. He's really the GM of a small winery based in Sonoma, and so Sam takes the lead on distributor negotiations, on the books, and keeping, and on compliance for sure, which are all things that he's much better at than I am. I think we share I probably have more time since he has a day job to go out and do promotion. But we both share in that as we are available. And I think our biggest conundrum, Don, was how to split the winemaking up. And the story on that, which is very funny, my wife and I were privileged to be at the Savannah Music Festival. If anyone is in Savannah, they can attest how wonderful it is. And we were watching a young and gifted program, and they were doing a recital, and it was bluegrass. And these were all young musicians from conservatories, which now have American music programs. And they played beautifully. And one of the instructors said, "That was terrible, guys." And I nudged my wife and said, "How could this guy be so brutal?" And he said, "You're all great players, but no one owned the piece. Whether it's the lead singer or the guitarist or the banjo player, someone needs to own it and communicate their investment in it to the audience." And I turned to my wife, I said, "That's it. That's how Sam and I are going to do Compline." Wine is so much like music, or as Sam, I'm a musician, Sam's a potter. When Sam's putting a handle on a cup, he doesn't, get 15 people in to vote on what the handle should look like. It's the expression of his art. When I'm taking a solo, it's my interpretation of the music. And so it's very important in wine, and we forget sometimes that wine is a communication like any art, and it needs to be one voice. So that's how we came to that decision.
That's fascinating. But now let me ask you a question as a father. Father, I guess if you see your son doing something that you disagree upon, how do you do it as a partner and as a father? How do you separate the two approaches?
That's sometimes it's tough.
Yeah.
And sometimes, one of the things that we're very proud of in our family is we're very direct with each other. And we've both had moments where we have, how would I say, reverted to old patterns of, the kind of angers and resentments that inevitably build up between parents and children. And we're good at correcting ourselves. So we just don't let things fester. And I think that's the important thing.
I think that's
and
the most
other thing is,
important.
as Mark Twain said, it's amazing how much smarter I got between the time my son was 17 and the time they were 25. So the fact that Sam has matured and gone through some of his own, he was a partner in a small winery. We couldn't have done this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
right now the timing is perfect. And the other thing, Don, is that I want to gift Sam with financial independence. That when I get to a point, I wouldn't do this if Sam wasn't with me. So as much as Sam likes to refer to my history and my reputation as really being a key factor to the success of this project, I wouldn't even have done this project if I didn't know that I could hand it off to Sam when I got aged and decrepit. So it works both ways. And the other last point I want to make is to quote Crosby, Stills, and Nash. I've learned so much from Sam. as a potter, one of the things he emphasizes is the craft aspect of winemaking. People get very romantic about wine as this, it's fine art. Well, yeah, some of it's fine art, but so much of it is craft.
Yeah.
And we forget the importance of craftsmanship in our vocation. It gets overly romanticized.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is just the dog work of, cleaning up the potter's wheel after you've thrown, trimming pots, So that's been really great. It's really a lovely exchange.
Yeah. And I think, Don, the thing that you always keep in mind is like there's always going to be friction with business partners, whether it's your father or it's somebody else, right? And friction's inherent, right? You're trying to build something, people are going to have different opinions, and that's healthy generally. And not building up resentment towards somebody you love is even easier than not building up resentment towards somebody that you were just working with. And so everybody has bad days. That's inherent in human communication. But I think the other aspect, the more important aspect, is people spend a lot of time with the people they work with, right? And so for us to go through our entire lives and then get to come together for the last 5 years and work together has been really special. We've just got to spend a lot of time together, whether or not you're complaining about I don't want to put anybody on blast. Well, you're complaining about sales, or you're complaining about cost of goods sold, or somebody doesn't deliver the packages right? Like you still have this confidant that you're spending time with and communicating with, and that's really special.
I'll stop you right here. Your website again for people?
www.complantwine.com.
And for
COMPLANTWINE.com. And if you would like to hear more of our discussions, I also have a podcast called The Winemaker's Journey, which is available on all the podcast channels.
Yeah, and for anybody who's considering coming to Napa and going to do some tastings, we host tastings on like by appointment only, individual tastings, where you'll either be with Dad or me. We're a small team. We want to touch everybody who wants to come taste. There is no tasting fee. We want people who care about wine and want to see what real Napa and like people who grew up and love this valley but aren't millionaires, right? Like we're here to show you what the real Napa lifestyle is, not some celebrated in GQ magazine lifestyle. We are just normal people who love the craft and strive to make the best wine we possibly can and have a healthy relationship with the land around us. So anybody who plans on coming to town, you can email us. I'm Sam at complantwine.com. My dad's Daniel at Daniel at complantwine.com. We love to touch consumers. We love to talk to people, whether it's about business or about pleasure, about wine or about art or about music. We have very broad spectrums of interest. And the one thing I learned from my father over the years that's really we both really have is obsession. We're really obsessive people, and so whether it's clarinet or pottery or winemaking, I think being an obsessive when you're a craftsperson is really important. And so, we love what we love, and we love to celebrate great wine and great conversation.
Well, that's a perfect point to end this program. Thank you both for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much,
Don.